Jags, this is Miss Hayes, and today we are going to talk about breaking down a writing prompt. And your essential question for today is, how can I make a writing prompt work for me? Please write that down in the essential question section of your Cornell notes. So the first thing you need to know is that most writing prompts do four things. First, they obviously ask a question or identify a task, but they also identify the specific audience to whom you're writing. And they provide additional information that points you in the right direction and helps you write your paper. And they specify length, formatting, or other requirements. So the first thing I'm supposed to do is identify the question or task to complete. Now, everything in your essay will revolve around this question or the task that you need to complete. And if you don't understand the question or the task, or if you can't find it, your essay will not fulfill the requirements of the prompt. So let's look at this example prompt. Words have two meanings: denotative, the literal definition, and connotative, the emotional definition. Write an 11-sentence paragraph that answers the essential question, how can our words, both written and verbal, affect others? You must use at least 3 pieces of textual evidence from Elizabeth McCracken's 2 texts, Desiderata and The Giant's House, to support your claim. First thing you need to do is find the question. The thing that you need to remember is that the question or the task is not always going to be the very first thing identified in the prompt. In this case, our task is in the middle of our prompt. How can our words, both written and verbal, affect others? That's the question you have to answer for your essay. Your thesis statement or your topic sentence should immediately answer this question in one sentence, because that's the whole point of your paper. Your thesis statement or topic sentence should answer the question using one sentence. Every other sentence in your paragraph or essay will support your thesis or your topic sentence. With 11-sentence paragraphs, you need to start with your topic sentence. That's one sentence that identifies the topic for the rest of the paragraph. Basically, the easiest way to figure out what your topic sentence is to answer that question, how can our words, both written and verbal, affect others, using just one sentence. And usually you restate the question when you answer the question. So you would say, our words, both written and verbal, affect others by blah, 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 period. That would be your topic sentence. Everything else in your response then is going to support that, and that's how you end up with an 11-sentence paragraph. Second, you need to identify the specific audience to whom you are writing. You don't talk to your grandmother the same way that you talk to your best friend, right? Well, your audience also matters in your writing. From the words that you use to the length of your sentences to the overall structure of your paper, if you write to the wrong audience, your message would be lost. You write differently on Facebook than you write in English class. While knowing your audience is extremely important to your response to the prompt, most prompts don't explicitly identify the audience. So in this prompt, it does not say, write an essay with your teacher as the audience. So unless there are details within the prompt that indicate that you are writing to a specific audience, always assume that you are writing to a teacher or an evaluator of some sort. So you're either writing for me or for the person that's going to be assessing your writing. If your audience is a teacher and an evaluator, always remember to use standard English, use academic language, and avoid using slang terms. In other words, write professionally. Next, you need to identify the additional information within the prompt. What's that helpful information that the prompt is giving you? Sometimes prompts will include helpful background information or definitions to help you guide your thinking and shape your essay. The additional information has been included to help you write your essay. If you are given definitions to terms, like in this example prompt where it says words have two meanings, denotative, the literal definition, and connotative, the emotional definition, then you should use that, right? Use those terms in your essay. If you are given background information, consider how that information relates to the question or the task. How might the words denotative and connotative relate to the question, how can our words affect others, right? So, in other words, don't ignore additional information. Fourth, you need to identify the length, formatting, and other requirements. Make sure you're aware of the length requirements so you know how detailed you should make your response. Some essays, like with this one, how can our words, both written and verbal, affect others? You could answer that question in just one sentence. But that's not what I want to see from you. I want to see that you can answer the question using an 11-sentence paragraph. I want to see that you can back up your claims. So you need to make sure that you're aware of the formatting requirements because this makes your response easier for your audience to read and understand. So we use MLA formatting in this class. MLA formatting refers to the way that your information is laid out on your paper. So you already know with MLA, you put your first and last name, date, period, and my name in the top left-hand corner of the page, not the top right. You always, in MLA formatting, you always use 12-point Times New Roman font. You always give your margins just 1 inch on the sides. There are very specific requirements, and there's a reason for that. It helps your paper to look more official and professional, and it also makes it a lot easier and neater for your teacher or for your evaluator so that we understand how to read it. And you also need to make sure you're aware of other requirements such as evidence from specific sources. Sometimes it might say that you need to have a certain amount of evidence from specific sources. That's important. So in this one, it tells us the requirements in 2 separate places. The first place is to write an 11-sentence paragraph, right? So we know what kind of response we need to write. We don't need to go as long as a 5-paragraph essay, but it should be longer than just 1 sentence, specifically an 11-sentence paragraph. And then it also tells us that we need to use 3 pieces of textual evidence, and we need to pull that evidence from 2 different sources, from Desiderata and from the Giant's House. So sometimes the length, formatting, and other requirements are in 2 separate places on the prompt, and sometimes they're in more than 2 places in the prompt. So make sure you're able to identify those and make sure you include those. It's always, always, always best to design your initial outline around the specific requirements of your prompt. So when you are outlining your essay, for example, in this case, you know it needs to be an 11-sentence paragraph. Well, soon you will learn that there is a very specific format for 11-sentence paragraphs. You don't just write 11 sentences willy-nilly and call it a day. Instead, you need to have a certain amount of chunks, a certain type of sentence. So here is an example of the 11-sentence paragraph outline, and you're going to learn more about this later, but I want you to pay attention to how I change my outline to meet the requirements of my prompt. So since this prompt requires that I use 3 pieces of evidence, but that I can use those 3 pieces from the 2 texts, then before I even read these texts, I'm going to build in the place for that evidence in my outline. So you can see I decided that I only want to use 1 piece of evidence from Desiderata and 2 pieces of evidence from the Giant's House. So I've put in my outline where I'm going to include that evidence to make sure that I meet that requirement. That way, once I get started writing, I don't forget to include maybe that last piece of evidence. And then I can make sure I get the grade because I've done everything I need to do. So let's look at a few examples. Here is a 9th grade PARCC prompt from the 2016 PARCC exam. And this one says to write an essay that analyzes how McCaffrey draws on and transforms a particular passage from Pope's translation of the Odyssey in her narrative retelling titled Odysseus. Include how the 2 selections are alike and different. Be sure to provide details from the selections to support your ideas and claims. So to break down this prompt, we are going to color code it. So first, we need to identify the question or the task. In this case, we have a task, and that task is to analyze, to break apart how McCaffrey draws on and transforms a particular passage from Pope's translation of the Odyssey in her narrative retelling titled Odysseus. So we know we need to analyze how she takes the original text and modifies it to be a completely new text. We also need to identify the audience, but like most prompts, this one doesn't specifically say who the audience is, and that's okay. Because remember, if there's no audience mentioned in the prompt, you're just automatically going to write professionally. And then we have helpful information. Now, in the case of PARCC, they rarely give you helpful information within their prompts, but there are other types of texts that do. So this one does not give us helpful information, but the next prompt will. So you'll be able to see what that looks like. And then the length, formatting, and other requirements would be to write an essay, but they don't specify how long this essay should be. They tell us to include how the two selections are alike and how they're different. So I need to somewhere explain how they're similar and also explain how they are different from each other. And it also says that I need to provide details from the selections to support my ideas and claims. Details, in other words, would be textual evidence. So I have to have textual evidence. It doesn't tell me how many pieces of evidence, but details is plural, which means I should have more than one piece of evidence. I could have 2, I could have 3, I could have 5, as long as I have more than one. So to make my outline, I am going to do a multi-paragraph outline because it tells me an essay. It doesn't say how long. In this case, I think 2 paragraphs would be sufficient. So my first paragraph will be on similarities. My second paragraph will be on differences. And then in my evidence section, I'm going to pull evidence from the first selection and evidence from the second selection and introduce both of those in the same paragraph. So here's an example from an ACT. This is the new ACT essay question. When you're juniors, you're going to need to take the ACT, which is a college readiness exam. So your ACT scores can determine what kind of scholarships you get and what types of colleges you can get into. So the ACT is very important. In this case, we need to first identify the question or the task, and it tells us up front. First thing, write a unified and coherent essay in which you evaluate multiple perspectives on the impact of globalization in the world. Now, on the ACT, they're going to give you different texts. They're going to give you different passages and different perspectives. I just didn't include those on here because they weren't as important for breaking down the prompt, but they are important for answering the prompt. And then my audience, again, is not mentioned in the prompts. So automatically, I'm going to write professionally. And then helpful information. This one gives us a little bit of helpful information, not a terribly large amount. So in this case, this helpful information is making me think about how I feel about the perspectives that have already been addressed. And then the other requirements would be I have to analyze and evaluate the perspectives given. I have to state and develop my own perspectives on the issue. I have to explain the relationship between my perspective and the perspectives given, and I have to support my ideas with logical reasoning and detailed persuasive examples. So what will my outline look like? Well, this is an essay. If you pay attention to the requirements that have been bulleted for us in the prompts, there's 3 of them. I could analyze and evaluate the perspectives given. Well, that could be 1 paragraph. State and develop my own perspectives on the issue should be my 2nd paragraph, and explain the relationship between my perspective and those given. That should be my 3rd paragraph. So my outline would look like this. Now let's look at an example from the AP Literature exam. First thing we need to do is identify the question or the task. And with AP, they like to put those at the end. In this case, we have a task, and that is to analyze the motives for that character's deception. And again, it doesn't tell us the audience, so we should write professionally. And then it gives us a ton of helpful information. This gives us a bunch of different examples of deception to help us think of a text that we could use to respond to this prompt. And then our length formatting and other requirements would be that it's a well-written essay. And we need to discuss how the deception contributes to the meaning of the work as a whole. So it's not enough to focus on the motives of the character's deception. We also have to look at the big picture. What does this tell us about the theme of the text? So for this essay, because it's an AP and because it's a timed essay, I'm just going to have a 4-paragraph essay, and that's okay. So in my introduction, I'm going to comment overall on deception as my hook. I'm also going to give a brief summary of the chosen text because since I'm picking my own novel or play that I've read in the past, I can't assume that the person reading this text has read the novel or play that I'm discussing. So in that case, I'm going to give them some brief background information so that they know what the heck I'm talking about. And then I'm going to give them my thesis. Now my first paragraph will focus on the motives for the deception. I'm going to analyze what those motives are. So there might be 2 motives, there might be 3 motives. I'm going to have 1 chunk per motive. And then my second paragraph is going to connect those motives and that deception to the overall theme of the text. The best way to analyze theme is to look at the changes from the beginning of the text to the end of the text. So I will compare and contrast. How does deception play a role at the beginning of the text? How does it play a role at the end of the text? And then finally, how do the differences between these teach a lesson about life? How does that create theme? And that's all I've got for you for today. Please make sure to take a moment to chunk your notes, to write a possible test or quiz question for each chunk, and to summarize your notes by answering the essential question, and go back and highlight the key ideas and details to help you study these notes. And always, always, always remember how to break down a prompt. If you have any questions, you can email me at kelly.hayes@aps.edu, or you can check out my website at misshayes.org, and I will see you tomorrow.